Welcome back. First off, what is sparking this debate over state and local rule? Florida has 67 counties and 412 cities. Depending on where you are in the state, the needs of the communities can be vastly different. This session, lawmakers are considering bills to limit the ability of cities and municipalities to make their own rules. The measures range from regulation of businesses to homestead tax exemptions to banning plastic bags. In recent weeks, we have seen mayors and county commissioners making the trip to Tallahassee and passing resolutions calling on legislators to let them make the decision right for their communities. How is it playing here on the Suncoast? Joining us for more on tonight's topic is Tom Barwin, City Manager for Sarasota, Commissioner Liz Albert of the Sarasota City Commission, and Commissioner Nancy Dietert of Sarasota's County Commission. She also spent 16 years in the Florida legislature as a representative in the House and as senator. And that's why we want to start with you.
Uh-oh.
How often do we hear state legislators, governors saying, you know, the federal government should stay out of our hair and let, you know, states' rights, let us make the decisions that benefit our state the best. So here are the very same legislators wanting to take some of the decision-making authority away from local cities and towns. What do you think?
Well, I always said I couldn't wait to be part of local government so I could blame everything on Tallahassee. So here I am, all ready to do that. But even as a member of the legislature, I always brought that up, that frankly, as Republicans, part of our core values are that the government closest to the people is the best, because nobody knows your community like the locals do. So some of the things that have been proposed will have a huge financial impact on us, and they do cause for regulations that we might not agree with. What we used to do is try to pass a state standard, and then if local government wanted to improve on that, make it more stringent, they could, but they can never make it less stringent. For example, water quality, air quality, all those things are good to do on a statewide for consistency. Now they're going the opposite direction, lowering standards and saying that local governments can't make them more stringent. And that's the opposite direction.
When you have pointed these things out to your former colleagues, what has been their rationale given their stance on states' rights?
Well, generally it's something that happened in their district that they're mad about, and then they want to make it for the whole state. Then our fallback position used to be to make our county exempt from the state law.
Right.
And then after you get 9 or 10 of those exemptions, pretty soon the bill would disappear.
So, Commissioner and Tom, what have you done to try to lobby the state that this is some of these bills, including plastic bags, that they can't be sold in certain municipalities? What have you done to try to lobby the state not to pass this?
Well, we went to, or some of us went to Tallahassee a few weeks ago and met with some of the state legislators and tried to make the point to them how important it is that local government make their own decisions. For example, they want to preempt local governments from being able to decide where wireless communications equipment goes in their city. We should be able to have that power to do that. We're the ones who have to deal with the neighbors who want to know why this, cell phone tower is put there. They want to regulate when we hold our elections. They want to regulate drones. I mean, there's just innumerable things that they're trying to say, we're going to preempt and say, as the city, as the people closest to the people, you can't regulate this, we're going to decide.
I want to get into some of these specific bills and what they want to regulate in our next segment, but Tom, on a practical basis, how would some of this legislation kind of handcuff you?
Well, there's a big one. It's hard to keep up of what's being considered in Tallahassee, but there's a Senate bill now that is really sponsored by the telecommunication industry. I think it's a part of a national trend that they're preparing for driverless cars. And when that era comes, there'll be a tremendous amount of data that's going to be shared between the vehicles and the system, the grid. And so there's a law right now to preempt city control local government control of right-of-way management. Now, as you probably know, we have a very limited space in which to put public utilities. Water, sewer, electricity, cable television, other things are in there, communication equipment. And now the legislature is considering a law that preempts us from even being a part of it and just say we have to allow them to put it in.
We want to talk all about this more in just a moment. We're just getting started. We'll pick up the conversation right after we check on our weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing local versus state autonomy. Florida's legislature is considering multiple bills to shift decision-making from municipalities to the states. Some cities are passing resolutions in opposition to the change. Our guests tonight are Sarasota City Manager Tom Barwin, Sarasota City Commissioner Liz Alpert, and Sarasota County Commissioner Nancy Dietert, who was formerly a state senator and House member. And folks, I'm wondering if some of these issues are different from each other. Including the issue of elections. In the city of Sarasota, we have spring elections for municipal governments. There's a huge debate about whether that's A, cost effective, and B, whether that, marginalizes the number of people who are coming out to vote. So wouldn't the state have an interest in having all elections, local and state and federal, on the same day? Commissioner.
Well, I would have hoped they would ask for our input, but I think they're responding to the general public on that one. I kind of agree that there is a mood amongst our taxpayers and citizens that we hold these elections at times when the fewest people are here. So big decisions are being made by the fewest amount of people. So they are trying to pass some legislation saying elections should be either during a primary or a general, and there's some merit to that, I would agree.
Commissioner, it costs the city of Sarasota a lot of money. I heard something, I may be wrong, $100,000 to have the election, the runoff and the election in May, and that, as the commissioner said, that it minimizes the number of people who vote. Isn't that an issue that it would seem that there is an interest on the state to have that across the board on one day, 1 month?
Well, I don't see how it is a state issue if it's the city that's spending the money. We're not asking the state to spend the money. I'm not saying it's good or bad. What I'm saying is the local citizens in their charter have decided when they want the elections, and the charters can be changed, but that should be done by the local citizens and not by the state legislature saying you must do it this way.
And I might add to that, what we're hearing locally, and this is a pretty common election pattern throughout the country in cities, but what we're hearing locally, there's another perspective, and that's the perspective of the candidate who has to run for office, and how much more money it costs to campaign against a presidential election or a gubernatorial election in terms of having to raise funds to get over the noise of the bigger elections. And so there's probably quadruples the cost of running for office. So for a low-income area, a minority district, or a millennial, they just don't have those kind of resources to compete.
All right, so that's one issue. Another issue that you all brought up was the issue of drones, which is something that, on one hand, the FAA is involved with, and they've put incredible restrictions on individuals who own and want to fly drones. Isn't there an interest there in the state to make sure, because we're dealing with aircraft and public safety, that you can't do something in Sarasota that you can do, let's say, in Bradenton?
Right, and I would agree with that too. Frankly, I think we need state and federal regulations when it comes to drones, because they do interfere with small planes, big planes, and it's a public safety issue. Where I would disagree is if they try to say that we can't make those rules even stronger than, the existing guidelines.
We have a huge airport in town or nearby, and this is an issue that impacts us locally.
Right. And I agree with Commissioner Dietert. I think there are some aspects of that I think that should be consistent statewide, and that it's important, I think, that the state looks into, but I still believe that it doesn't preclude or shouldn't preclude the city from making its own stronger regulations if necessary.
Now, there's another area in terms of taxation on vacation rental owners. And I've noticed in one of the stories that I've been looking at, even local legislators like Greg Stubbe are the ones who are pushing for the state to have the authority. Have you been able to talk to the Senator Stubbe about this? And we are such a tourist-driven area that this is something that I would think our local community would be very concerned about.
Well, he's already talked to the press about why he's doing that bill. He wanted to buy a second home for himself and his family in another community, and he didn't see why he should not be able to rent it out or have to pay a tax. So he comes up with a state law, and here we all are.
Oh, that's special.
Yeah, I mean,
And we do have
that
rules
is the...
in the city. Right now, the rule is 7 days. If you're going to lease out your house, it has to be for at least 7 days, not less than 7 days. So I think the fear is that it could turn some of our fantastic neighborhoods into daily rentals, like hotel neighborhoods, and people be coming out each and every day.
And it's a particular problem with beach communities
Right.
who really are having problems with the short-term rentals and the effect on the permanent residents, and that they can't, they can't regulate that at all. And they're basically hotels that are unregulated, and somehow that doesn't make sense, that we shouldn't be able, again, at the local community, to put in our own standards.
And I believe there is an issue in Bradenton Beach as well concerning this very issue, but it's also an issue of public safety, because you have to police these communities, and I would imagine that incredibly short-term rentals makes the shoreline or wherever a more transient type of population, and that gets back to local communities in terms of being able to...
See, governments aren't really prepared for all the new technology. You're used to a rental. We used to have rules for 3 months or 30 days or 2 weeks. You can rent them by the day now through Airbnb. And as a senator, I noticed the outcry is coming from the wealthier communities, the Palm Beaches. They're renting a big house to maybe 12 families all at the same time. So you're living in an exclusive neighborhood, and now there's 12 cars parked on the lawn because there's not parking for all the people that flew in and rented a car, and they're all occupying the same dwelling. So that's where your local knowledge comes in handy. That's where it's difficult to pass a state rule, and it really needs to be home rule in those cases.
And we don't want to give you the wrong impression that local governments are regulatory machines, that all we want to do is regulate, because it wasn't so long ago when the Sarasota City Commission deregulated Uber and taxi cabs, and that appears to have worked out very well for us in the city, and we just went with the corporate standards that they set up. We had a confidence level that they would work. So that deregulation locally has seemed to work well.
Let me ask you this, the state legislative session is continuing. We don't know what the final fate of these bills are, but if it's an issue that local municipalities or counties feel strongly about, what would be the recourse if the state takes over a lot of these decisions? I mean, is there litigation or that could be made, or is that what it is?
Well, as a county commissioner, I would suggest we just live with it and petition next year if we're negatively impacted. A lot of these, I'm looking at the list of bills that are out there that affect local government. The vacation rental one is not looking good for passage, frankly. A lot of them have already kind of died on the vine, the ones that seem the most flamboyant. So we're always reactive where everybody flies up. I mean, I went up last week with the Association of Counties to protest some of these bills, testified against the bill, and so did 3 other people who were former legislators who are now county commissioners. It was like old home week. and we got voted against.
but like many issues in the state legislature has to deal with, including gun bills and so forth, just because it fails this year, it doesn't necessarily mean it won't be brought back again next year. And given how the legislature changes, if it doesn't pass this year, it could very well pass next year, possibly.
I used to say it's like killing cockroaches. You just killed it and it's back next year. But as it returns, it morphs into something more reasonable, because the first time you do a bill, you throw it out there and you see who hates it. And so you make those changes the next year because your bill failed.
Right. Tom, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I was just going to say, I think there are a couple things the legislature should have in mind, and as we hash some of this stuff out locally, it strengthens the community, it strengthens the civic relationship, and strong communities are in the state's best interest for the long run. But I'm concerned with the growing, and Nancy may have an opinion on this, the growing influence of special interests and money. As long as the citizens are making the decisions and provide the input, I'm confident we have pretty good decisions, and that happens all the time on the local level. But when you move to those higher levels of government, there's some new actors who are contributing more and more money into the system to help influence it.
Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests. Stay with us. Welcome back. Who should make the rules? We have seen cities across Florida passing resolutions to show their support for more home rule. It comes after the legislature is considering bills which would shift authority to state level. So what should be left to local leaders? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Commissioner, we'll start with you.
Well, I think what people should remember is that the best control is local control for many, many issues. One of the things that you have to think about is that the state legislature only meets once a year for 2 months, and local governments meet all of the time. So it's easier for citizens to have input into what's decided in their local community. And if you take that away, the legislature is going to be not as responsive and spend too much of their time worrying about local issues rather than the statewide issues that they should be concentrating on. So I think, to make the point that really we need to protect municipal home rule and, keep the state from preempting us from making the decisions we should be making.
Commissioner, do you think that any of these bills have real chance at passage?
Some of them do. Some of them will be a watered-down version of what was submitted. What I think the lesson is, when they file bills, I take it as kind of sometimes it's just a shot across the bow. And one of the shots that I think we as local government should listen to is the one about holding elections at times when there aren't a lot of people here. I've told our county manager that if we're ever going to do anything that raises taxes, we should do those during regular election periods when you get the most people. It's the fairest way to do it.
Boy, we've had this debate so often in Sarasota, and it's an issue even in the city commission race right now. People who want those elections in the spring say, look, hey, voters have voted on this and they're not going for it.
Well, time will tell what the voters do. They'll ultimately resolve it. The people here seem to like the system for the most part, but I'd encourage citizens to follow the money. Right now there's a bill pending where AT&T and Verizon could push through some special interest legislation that could result in basically a pole, a 20, 30, 50, 60-foot pole being placed every 50, 60 feet or less, and we'd have no say absolutely, and we could only charge $15 to approve the permit. I mean, that's how strong some of the special interest legislation is.
All right, we'll have to leave.
I'd like to add to that, that's where media comes in. You have a role to play too. This happened on the last ballot with FPL.
You know what? That sounds like a topic for another show that maybe we'll put on the schedule. Thank you all for being here tonight. For Tom Barwin is the Sarasota City Manager. Liz Alpert is on the Sarasota City Commission, and Nancy Deirdre is on Sarasota County Commission.